So, here's where the United States finds itself today. The United States must now counter nuclear superpowers in both China and Russia, while also deterring the itchy trigger fingers of unstable dictators like Kim Jong-un and the Ayatollah in Iran. We should be innovating and preparing our nuclear arsenal for this new global dynamic, but instead our nuclear stockpile remains stuck in the Cold War. And that is just a fact. Put simply, America's nuclear stockpile is old and it is shrinking. And while modernizing our nuclear arsenal should be a top priority, our effort to restart nuclear weapon production has been riddled with delays and poor planning. And we do not have time to waste. The United States has not built a single nuclear warhead since the close of the Cold War. Let me say that again. The United States has not built a single nuclear warhead since the close of the World War. Instead, we have focused on what we call life extension programs to keep our old weapons operational by refurbishing them. Those that aren't refurbished are destroyed. From 1994 until 2020, the United States dismantled 11,683 total nuclear warheads. And this total does not include the 2,000 other warheads that have been retired while awaiting their own demolition as well. Most of our nuclear warheads are decades old. The facilities where we built and store these are even older. As recently as 2019, the computer system controlling our nuclear weapons ran on floppy disks. I kid you not. Today, we're so far behind in our nuclear revitalization that we cannot even produce plutonium pits. Plutonium pits are an essential component of every nuclear weapon. Plutonium pits sit at the center of a warhead. They're not all that different from pits in a peach. The pit is essential because it triggers the nuclear explosion. Plutonium pits do not last forever. They can only sit inside a weapon for roughly 100 years before we must replace them. And the clock is ticking on many of our Cold War era weapons. During the Cold War, Mr. President, the United States could produce more than 1,000 plutonium pits per year. And without plutonium pit, you can't have a nuclear weapon. But the United States has not regularly manufactured plutonium pits since 1989. In fact, the United States has not produced a single warhead-ready plutonium pit since 2012. And as you would imagine, our nuclear engineers cannot just stop by the hardware store to pick these up. It doesn't work that way. Pit production is a very complex, a very expensive, and a very time-consuming process. But our adversaries haven't stopped. Our adversaries certainly haven't stopped. China, Russia, North Korea, Pakistan, all continue to produce plutonium pits to ready their arsenals. Yet the United States of America fell asleep at the wheel and let our plutonium pit production die off almost entirely. Keeping our nuclear arsenal in shape is sort of like keeping your body in shape. If you stop exercising altogether, it will be very painful when you start it again. The United States is learning this the hard way. In 2014, Mr. President, the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense determined that it would need at least 4,000 new plutonium pits. 4,000, not 40, not 400, 4,000 new plutonium pits to replace the aging pits in our current weapons as part of our larger refurbishment strategy. New pits are also needed for any new weapons that we choose to build. Department officials determined that the United States would need to produce a minimum of 80 plutonium pits per year by 2030 to be able to reach our national security goals by 2080. To meet this goal, Congress passed a bill. And in that bill, we instructed the National Nuclear Security Administration, we call it the NNSA, to resume plutonium pit production in 2 separate facilities in 2015. Congress tasked the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico with a goal of 30 pits per year, and we tasked the Savannah River site in North Carolina with the remaining 50 to achieve the 80 plutonium pits per year capacity. But that hadn't happened. I meant it when I said we fell asleep. That hasn't happened. Pit production has been postponed and postponed and postponed. Most recently, NNSA Administrator Jill Ruby estimated that the United States will hit its production goals sometime in 2036, 6 years later than projected. The delays are so significant that in 2021, the commander of the U.S. Strategic Command testified before Congress that no amount of funding, no amount of money, would have been enough to get the NNSA to its production capacity goal by 2030. That's what happens when you fall asleep. That's what happens when you stop exercising. These new pits are not just nice to have. They are essential for developing new weapons to deter aggression from hostile nations. Consider, Mr. President, what our military calls the W-87-1 modification program. Under this program, the United States is developing or trying to develop a new warhead that would ride atop the next generation of ICBMs. And an ICBM, of course, is an intercontinental ballistic missile. But these new weapons cannot run on old plutonium pits. They require a new design. The delayed pit production means that these warheads and our ability to deter China's growing arsenal is delayed as well. Now,